Botafogo are out. Gadam Nedum with us. Ali, overall, this wasn't very good.
Overall, you are 100% correct. And I think that first challenge by Alexander Barbosa kind of gave us an idea as to what this game was going to be all about, certainly from the perspective of Botafogo. Palmeiras, I thought, were the only team that were interested in playing and interested in creating opportunities and finding some isolation with Estevao. I think they lack in the final third. Palmeiras, they're unable, once they find themselves in good positions, they're unable to create the chances or find the final pass or make the final decision. It makes you wonder when you see Vitor Roque play for Palmeiras, because we've seen him with Barcelona, we've seen him with Betis, and you can draw conclusions from that. But now at Palmeiras, you're thinking, well, maybe he's going to be better there.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder how in the world was this guy picked up by Barcelona and paid as much money as he was to go to Barcelona. Because honestly, I just don't see it. It's a raw talent that seems to be rushed every time he gets on the ball. It feels like he wants to get 1,000 decisions made in a second or two, and it just doesn't work that way. Vitor Roque, I don't think is the sort of player that would thrive in this sort of environment, and if you're depending on him to be the one that scores the goals, I just don't think that's the case. However, Palmeiras do enough.
Yes.
They win the game, and I think deservedly so. Botafogo and Palmeiras, particularly Botafogo in the first 45 minutes, were interested in one thing, and that's kicking the bejesus out of each other.
Yeah.
And Botafogo didn't offer anything in the attack, didn't offer anything interesting through the midfield. Palmeiras kept most of the ball, tried to create some chances, tried to create some opportunities, did enough to win the game, and I think, as I said before, deservedly so, they advanced.
Yeah, I think that's the takeaway there, Nedum, is that the best team won?
Yeah, I would say so, and it's about just doing enough, as Ali's been saying there. Unless it wasn't a classic game, and I think from my perspective, getting a chance to watch some of these Brazilian sides go up against teams from outside of their continent, you can sort of see the benefits, the style that they have, and how it can cause problems. But then when they go up against each other, in this game in particular, it just didn't quite hit the same way that you thought it would do. But it's not to say that it wasn't a good game in some ways. You know, the commitment was there. Didn't necessarily have some of the flair that we've seen in times gone by, but there were two sides that were going to do everything they could to make sure they were in the next round. And thankfully, there was that little bit of quality. And as Ali said, yes, there was that little deflection, but it's a nice setup, and I think it's very much deserving of that goal in that moment. So, you know, they're into that next round now, and who knows who they could face.
A lot of eyes, of course, Gab, on Estevao, given the hype around him, and of course that big move to Chelsea, which is imminent. What are Chelsea going to do with him?
It's a good question. I mean, I think at some point they're going to have to decide whether he sticks around or whether, you know, it makes more sense to give him the minutes, give him on loan. It's always tricky. But remember, this guy's just 18 years old, right? So kind of parameters of players who come over to Europe that young. You know, you have the Endrick scenario where he goes to a big team and, you know, basically never plays. Or you've got other people who are ready to contribute. I mean, I think, you know, given he plays on the right-hand side, Chelsea might feel that they're already better served there, and if they can't give the minutes, he may go on loan. Personally, I think he's got enough quality to be there, but you know, if Madueke is going to be your first choice on that flank, or possibly, given what we saw in previous games, you know, Enzo Fernandez at 10 and Cole Palmer out there, then it gets a little bit crowded.
What's interesting, Nedum, if you look at Chelsea in the past, obviously the likes of Lampard, Terry, Petr Cech, whoever it might be the sort of person to put your arm around you, like introduce you to the squad, help you bed in. With this Chelsea at the moment, there seems to be so many youngsters and so much competition for places. Is it fair to say the environment he's going into is going to be a difficult one for him to adapt to?
Possibly, but again, some of that's just difficult because he's going to a new continent as an 18-year-old, and with a, you know, relatively speaking, a hefty price tag and a sense of pressure in terms of being able to step forward and to be successful. I think as we've seen across the last few years for Chelsea, there has been disappointment in terms of, say, relative lack of success for them. So every time there's a new sign as well, this will be the guy that will take us back to where we feel that we belong. But what I would say is going back all those years to those players that you've mentioned with Lampard's, Terry's, all these guys, you know, that Chelsea side was a big, mature side. And I think youngsters coming in had to match that level of maturity if they wanted to play and fit in. I think you hear the stories of the likes of Mo Salah and Kevin De Bruyne not really being able to even find a spark or find a moment in that team. And now you look at those two, see two of the best players to ever play in the Premier League. So I think in some ways, the system that it is now, where there is an emphasis on younger players, maybe it'll make it fractionally easier for Estevao. You know, as he comes over, has to learn the language, get used to the weather, the culture, the way that football's being played. Whereas I think because he's got more youngsters around him, perhaps that'll make it easier because there'll be more people who could probably relate to just that little bit more. So I'm hopeful for him, but again, at the age of 18, he's got a long time ahead of him, hasn't he?
Hendrik's an interesting example that Gab brings up, given all the hype around him. Moved to Real Madrid, and so far, obviously, it hasn't been quite what he expected. Obviously, different player, different circumstances, different expectations, yet still, as Nedum says, at just 18 years of age, there's a lot going on and off the pitch.
There's a problem for Estevao and any other 18-year-old that is coming now into this sort of stage, and that is Lamine Yamal. And the reason it is a problem is because Lamine Yamal at 17, he's dominating. And has been dominating. And so now this sort of expectation was like, well, if that guy can do it, and he's in the same profile of player, well, why not? Why not? And it says unrealistic expectations. And so the one thing that I would say that Estevao has going for him is that if you watch Palmeiras play, their attack is based upon what Estevao does or doesn't do. Right. They'll go as far as he's able to take them because he is the one source of creativity and dynamic movement that they have. And when you are that player, even at a young age, there's a level of confidence that goes along with that. And knowing full well that this team, filled with all this experience and filled with talented players, they are depending on me to be the one that creates chances. And that's the way they play Palmeiras. They find Estevao, they isolate him and hope that he does something. It's as simple as that. So maybe in having been carrying that responsibility already, it doesn't hit him nearly as hard that even though he's 18 and he's going to a different culture, a different language, when it comes down to it, you give me the ball on my feet and I know I can take players on. I think young players run into issues when they start trying to do things differently than what got them there to begin with. And if Estevao simplifies his game and says, man, with the ball at my feet, I don't care how old or how young I am, I can take players on. If he does that, then I think he can be useful to Chelsea. You see the change of pace. The change of pace is not going to disappear because he takes a flight from Brazil to London. You see the talent. You see the potential. And then it's now up to Chelsea to be able to nurture and develop that talent and that potential.
Jurgen Klopp has jumped in and then some. Okay. The Club World Cup is the worst idea ever implemented in football. People who have never had anything to do with day-to-day business are coming up with these ideas. Perhaps not everyone has recognised the real problem yet, that next season players will suffer injuries that will never have had before. If not this season, then it will happen. There will be injuries at some stage at the World Cup or afterwards. Gab, I want to go to you first because you've been very pro-Club World Cup, of course, since its announcement.
Idea of a Club World Cup, I think it's long overdue. The implementation, I'm not necessarily a fan of, and maybe even some of the reasons why it came about. Look, this whole thing, it's like, oh, look, there could be more injuries because some players are playing more games and, there's going to be a different preseason. I mean, first of all, I think everybody has said this. Klopp is kind of just one of many people who has repeated what others have said. Is it a risk? Sure. But, the reality is countries have been playing, or players have been playing in Euros and Copa Americas and World Cups at the end of the season. They do it every 2 years. Now we're asking them to do it again one more time and then go into club season. Is this going to... is this going to affect them irredeemably? I don't know. And the other thing, which I don't get, is he says people who have nothing to do with day-to-day business. Well, some critics of the Club World Cup would say this is actually all about day-to-day business. It's all about making more money, more sponsorship, bringing more money to FIFA so that they can redistribute it, and then Gianni Infantino can get reelected and whatever else. So I think there's many things you can criticize them for, but chasing the business day to day, I don't think that's one of them.
Nedum?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. From my perspective, since the pandemic, you hear so much talk about players and burnout and so on. And as time has passed, the conversation kind of slid away to the background a little bit. But there's still that 1% who plays so much football. And I don't know if others are the same as me, but for some of these guys playing maybe 60 to 80 games a season, that's an obscene amount of football. You know, we're talking 2 seasons worth of football for the average player happening in the space of 1 year. But it's another year back to back to back to back. But then we'll say, oh, you know, when the tournament's over, you get 3 weeks off. What is 3 weeks off when you've played all that football to this point? So I think from Jurgen Klopp's perspective, having seen those players and been at a club where that's the amount of football that's being played, you can definitely see the concern there. I think overall, though, in terms of how football is, there are some teams who maybe are looking for more football. There was a point last year when I was lucky enough to speak with Gilberto Silva, and he was talking about how there's some teams that seek more football. He was talking about some of the teams in Brazil, for example, trying to find more games and so on. And it's funny because they're all going to take part in the same competition, but have different eyes on it, different perspectives. Like the teams that are halfway through their season now, you know, whether we're looking at MLS or other places like that, like this tournament isn't really that great an inconvenience as such for them. So I get his point. It's 100% valid from the perspective of his teams, the teams that are like his, because for these players and for the staff and for everybody involved, it's a lot of football. And in some ways, I'm just glad that it's once every 4 years, because if this was an annual thing, then it would be chaotic. But again, the talk that has been said, it's been said many times over, as Gabba said, the fitness, the players, the injuries and so on and so forth. And I'll be honest, I can't even begin to think how hard it would be to play that much football and to be playing football at this point in the season after having already played for, you know, the previous 11 months as well.
I think if you look at it from the perspective of the teams that are not here, that are not in the Club World Cup, if you're Liverpool, for example, you're rooting hard, and I mean you are rooting hard for Manchester City to go deep in this Club World Cup. Yeah, get your minutes. Yeah, have stress. Have physical stress, have mental stress, go all the way through the Club World Cup, and yeah, take your 3 weeks off, but at some point you're going to have to come back. And everything is delayed then for Manchester City. And so Liverpool has an advantage. If I'm Barcelona, I'm rooting hard for Real Madrid to go deep for the same reasons. Because guess what? Real Madrid, at some point, Jude Bellingham is going to have his surgery. And they've made a choice that they're going to push that surgery. And that affects Real Madrid, and that affects the start of the season. And so, if I'm Barcelona, I'm rooting hard for Real Madrid to get more minutes, more stress, more physical stress, more mental stress. Yeah, all of this seems to be useful and important for the teams that continue to advance, but I think it's just as useful and important for the teams that are not here and are seeing these teams putting unnecessarily more minutes and more stress on their bodies.